Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Meet the Grantmakers online. My name is Angela Richardson, and I am a senior trainer at the Grantsmanship Center. On behalf of the center, I am so happy to welcome you to our fall edition of the Meet the Grantmakers panel. We have an illustrious panel prepared for you, as we always do. So we welcome those of you that are joining us for the first time, and welcoming those of you that are repeat. If you've been here before, you know that we always prepare a great panel for you. So I first just want to introduce myself. As I mentioned, I'm Angela Richardson. I'm a senior trainer here at the Grantsmanship Center. Couple of housekeeping tips. We are recording this. I know this will come up several times in the chat, but just to start it off, yes, we are recording it. And since you are enrolled, you will get the recording in a follow-up email after this panel is over. In addition to recording it, there is closed captioning that's available to you. So if you just toggle down below, you can turn on the closed captioning so that you can get the transcript of this as well. I also want to thank the sponsors that make this panel possible each time: Grant Station, Foundant, and of course the Grantsmanship Center. We all collaborate, coming together with our shared resources and expertise to bring this, what I think to be a very important conversations, to the nonprofit field. So with that, I'm so excited because I want to introduce this panel. They're so wonderful. We just had a great conversation getting to know each other. So I'm looking forward to you getting to know them as well. So to start, first we have Marsha Bonner. Marsha is the Senior Director of Programs, Community Grantmaking, and Special Initiatives. Marsha is here in Los Angeles with me, where I am also located. So I'm looking forward to hearing about everything that they're doing locally for me anyway. And then next we have Jennifer Killian. She is the Program Officer for the Dyson Foundation, and they're located in Millbrook, New York. And finally, we have DeVore. He is the president of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, and they're located in Detroit. So every panel, we try to get a variety of different grant makers representing different communities across the country to see what we have in common, what we're doing similarly, and what we're doing differently. So you as grant seekers can have that understanding that there's so many foundations out there and they're all so different, and to learn. All right, so this is our panel for today, and I'm going to start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves. So they're going to share a little bit about their foundations, some of their initiatives, so you can get a feel for the type of foundation that they are. I just want to let you know that you also have their full bios and their profiles as well. So some of that information will be in there, and some of it you can go and read about them and visit their websites. So with that, Marsha, I'm going to ask you to please start us off.
Good morning, everyone, and hello to my fellow panelists, Jennifer and Rick. Nice to meet you guys. Angela, thank you so much. And just want to say a word of thanks to Kathleen and her team at the Grantsmanship Center. We've been a supporter of their work for years, and so happy to be able to join you for this panel. Again, my name is Marsha Bonner. I'm the Senior Director of Programs, Community Grantmaking, and Special Initiatives at the Annenberg Foundation. I've been here for 7 years. I have a long history. I'm not going to bore you, but this is my 41st year in philanthropy. So I'm one of the old G's in philanthropy. So just to let you know, that's why I have all this gray hair. It's all the different foundations that I've worked at. But I live and work on the ancestral lands of the Tongva people here in West Los Angeles. So excited to be here with you. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the Annenberg Foundation. I made some notes, so if I'm not looking directly at you, it's because I'm looking at my notes. I don't have all this memorized. But the Annenberg Foundation is a family foundation. We sometimes call it a private foundation. And it was founded by Walter Annenberg, who a lot of people know this or don't know this, but he was the ambassador to the court of St. James in England from 69 to 74. And so we called him Ambassador Annenberg. I did not know him, but that's how we refer to him. He had a distinguished career as a publisher, a broadcaster, a diplomat, of course, and a philanthropist. He was president and subsequent chairman of the board of Triangle Publications. And what I always find so interesting about how worlds collide, he published TV Guide. And when I was younger, I actually I had boxes and boxes of the TV Guide when they were smaller. And here I am working where the founder of TV Guide, founded. And also he bought 17 magazine. So he had a very, very broad publishing empire, as well as radio and TV stations. The foundation was established in 1989 when the Triangle Publications was sold. And upon the death of the ambassador and then his widow, Wallace Annenberg, who is our current chair and president, took over the foundation. It started in Pennsylvania. It's now here in Los Angeles. She leads the foundation with three of her children, Lauren Bond, Gregory Annenberg Weingarten, and Charlie Annenberg Weingarten. And they are the trustees of the foundation. If you go to our website, you'll see all of the work that the three trustees engage in, as well as the work of Wallace Annenberg. The total giving of the foundation is roughly $85 million annually. The majority of that giving is from the trustees, mostly from Wallace. Their broad interests include journalism, communications, animal welfare, the environment, and social justice. The arts, of course, as well. They also give locally, nationally, as well as internationally. I'm going to talk more about what we do locally because that's where community grant making is. It's the only program, it's what we call discretionary grant making, where applicants can actually apply for a grant. You cannot apply to the trustees for a grant. They do all of their grant making privately. And then it's posted on our website. The regions that the community grant making gives in, 5-county region of Southern California. And I have to write these down because it's 5 counties and I always forget one, and it's never the same one that I forget. So we fund in Los Angeles County, Ventura, Orange County, San Bernardino, and Riverside County. So they're the 5 surrounding counties of Los Angeles County. And the city of Los Angeles, of course, is in Los Angeles County. We fund primarily all nonprofit organizations, and we look for best practices that groups display in diversity, financial sustainability, infrastructure, board governance, staff development, programs and services, collaboration, and network with peers. Those are the kinds of things that we evaluate nonprofits on. We fund a broad swath of areas. Education, health and human services are our biggest areas. Arts, culture, and humanities, the environment, civic involvement and community, social justice, and we give smaller amounts to military veterans and animal welfare. The grant range is from $10,000 to $100,000, and this is the discretionary grant making where you can actually apply for a grant. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but I'll just say it now that during the pandemic, we suspended online grant making so that we could have more flexibility in supporting projects specifically around COVID and the pandemic, as well as other organizations that were working to make it easier for people to live and work during the pandemic. And we hope to open up online grant making in 2023. I'll talk a little bit later about our capacity building because I know you're going to ask that question, but I think I'll end that for now and turn it back over to Angela.
Thank you. Yes, I can't wait to hear about the capacity building because I know you all are doing some really interesting and broad-reaching work, have been for many, many years. Yeah. So thank you, Marsha. Jennifer, we're going to move on to you.
Good morning, and actually good afternoon from where I'm from in New York. My name is Jennifer Killian. I'm a program officer with the Dyson Foundation. So I primarily oversee our capacity building initiatives. So I'm super excited to hear what Marsha has to share with us later to see what I might be able to glean from that. But I also am involved in the foundation's broader grant making. Our foundation is a private family foundation as well. It was established back in 1957 by Charles and Margaret Dyson, and Charlie Dyson was actually the pioneer of the leveraged buyout, very sort of a for-profit businessy sort of thing, but and he was a really well-loved and known philanthropist throughout his whole life. And now his son, Robert Dyson, continues to be our chairman and leading this foundation. We are really, there's two sides of the foundation. So there's a lot of family-directed giving, and then we have our Mid-Hudson Valley program. So we are a responsive grant maker here in the Mid-Hudson Valley. And just to orient everybody geographically, we serve a 6-county region. We're kind of right in between in the Mid-Hudson Valley between New York City and the Albany area. So from north to south, we are serving Columbia, Greene, Dutchess, Ulster, Putnam, and Orange counties here in the Mid-Hudson Valley. We do have a concerted effort to Dutchess County, which is the family's home community. And again, we've been a long time funder of human services and ensuring the basic safety net is here for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable members of our community. And we've also been a long time capacity building funder. So we do what we call mini grants for consultant-led projects, and we also have had a long initiative supporting strategic restructuring, helping organizations figure out how to come together to scale to increase impact. So that's in a nutshell what we do. And certainly everybody has our access to our website. Our annual grant making is about $11 million, a little bit heavier split to the Mid-Hudson Valley than to the family side, and I think our most recent grand total since our inception, we've given about $400 million in our history.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And Rick.
Thank you, Angela. Rick DeVore, CEO and President of the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan. We're a 7-county area, approximately just under 5 million people in our service area. This foundation was started by Joe Hudson in 1984, so I get the distinct pleasure of founding and following the only leader ever of this foundation, Marion Nolan, who retired last year. I'm different than everybody that spoke so far because we are a community foundation, so not only do we grant, but we take in funds and obviously have to follow donor intent. Last year, we made approximately 5,000 grants for just a little bit over $100 million. I'd like to say that we're 1.4 billion, but that was before the market correction, which I'm not enjoying at all. But the history of this foundation and the legacy of my who I'm following really was about capacity building. We managed 231 endowments for nonprofit foundations and approximately 450 donor advised funds. So obviously donor intent is very important. When we do a scan, though, I would say that there's probably nothing that would be of interest to a donor that we're not involved with. Everything, we have a $20 million social justice fund that we've established with the Hudson Weber Foundation. To environmental matters, I'm looking out my window at Canada as we speak, watching the iron ore freighters go by for their last trip up to the Upper Peninsula to get ore. But we just signed a memorandum of understanding with the Canadian government on greenways and trailways from Port Huron, Michigan down to Flat Rock. So it does give you kind of an idea of the breadth of what we do. What also might be of interest is, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself in terms of some of the questions, but we are also kind of a convener and collaborator. We manage the grand bargain funds from Detroit bankruptcy, the largest bankruptcy in the history of this country, municipal-wise. We manage something called the Pontiac Collaborative. So we do a lot of work with other foundations and actually do the work and also do part of the funding as well. But so it's a little bit different. We do have some statewide initiatives we're working on that might be a little bit different for folks. We do manage the opioid settlement for the state. So that's statewide. We do that work, like I said, statewide. And also some of the ARPA funds are rather interesting, but I can get into that later with some of its compliance and audit requirements. But so that's a little bit about our organization. There's 55 employees, and I'm one of 9 males, by the way, in this organization. You can do with it whatever you want with that one, but it is a great organization. But we're rather young when it comes to community foundations, compared to, say, Cleveland or Boston or New York. So at 37 years old, we're still kind of a teenager when it comes to community foundations.
Thank you. And Rick, I wonder if you would just, for those audience members out there that aren't quite familiar what a community foundation is, you kind of mentioned, you alluded to it in your intro, but could you just tell them like,
Sure.
what is a community foundation and how is
So
it
unlike a private foundation, we actually take in funds as well. Like I mentioned, donor advised funds, but also would have to follow, donor intent. So sometimes it does get a little bit frustrating for folks because they're like, well, why don't you just go all in with all your money in this initiative? But we clearly have a fiduciary to, following donor intent. But like I said, we have so many funds that we manage. We probably have something within. We encourage people, even if they get turned down, to come back again the following year, because many times our fund mix changes. So it's a little bit different. I'm in the fundraising side as well as the granting side, which is a little bit different for people. And I find that it's not really real understood. There's about 800 community foundations in the country. We'd be the 24th largest. But a lot of them are very small. I mean, I might be talking to somebody that has a county in northern Michigan with 40,000 people, and it's not quite the same. But we're so a little bit different. And also, we have the power of variance, which is not to be used, lightly. But a lot of times, a fund has been established where the intent is gone, and so we have the ability to redirect those funds as long as they're in the same field of interest. Obviously, I don't do that without an opinion of counsel, and that's not very often, but it does happen. And so that is a little bit different. Also, we are, people can be anonymous, and we're not subject to the 5% payout that a private foundation would be. So some of the rules are different. I don't, but I actually have somebody on staff that can lobby, which is also a little bit different. And so there's some nuances to it. I must admit to you though, Angela, I do have some younger employees that I've had to teach what the differences are when they get upset. Well, how come we just didn't go all in on XYZ project or whatever? And again, we have to follow donor intent.
Yeah.
But the collaboration part of it, the convening part of it, I think is one of our trademarks, and I give all the credit to Miriam on that. She was the master at the convening side, which is we manage something called the New Economy Initiative, which is a fund started in 2007 to support small business, especially businesses, women-led or people Black and brown. We probably granted $180 million over the life of that fund. So it's a little bit different mousetrap, if you will, but a really neat one and really exciting to see the variety that I get to see.
Great. I'm looking forward to jumping into some of that as we go along. Thank you, Rick. Okay, so first of all, I want to just say thank you to all of you out there. When you enrolled, many of you submitted questions, and we're going to start with some of the questions that you all submitted. But in addition to that, there's a question and answer feature. So we will also take some live questions. So as we go along, I'll be interweaving some pre-submitted questions and also some live ones. So feel free to drop them into the Q&A section down there at the bottom of the menu. All right, so the first question that came in, there was several questions and I blended them into one. And Marsha, we're going to start with you on this question. And then some of you already started to pepper it into your introductions. And the question is, what changes in grant making arose as part of the pandemic and racial uprising in 2020? And what are some of the shifts that may be lasting, or maybe some that are going away as well? So I'd love to just hear each of you share. It's been a big year for all of us. So how has that, or big several years for all of us? So thank you, Marsha, for starting.
Sure. So like everyone, March 2020 was sort of like D-Day, particularly in Southern California. And so we closed our offices as everybody here did and worked remotely. But we also took the opportunity to pivot in terms of our online grant making. We decided to no longer do the online grant making and go to invitation only, which would allow us the flexibility to support those organizations that were working very, very specifically on the pandemic, like those that were doing early testing, before there was a vaccine. So we stood up several clinics just for testing. As soon as we got the vaccine, we immediately invited proposals from a lot of the free clinics and other kinds of clinics that were serving communities of color here in Los Angeles and the 5 surrounding counties we actually stood up a couple of clinics ourselves here on Foundation property to do clinics for both testing as well as early vaccines. Because I know you all know this, but there was really a discrepancy between who was getting the early vaccines, who was eligible. We had people coming from surrounding counties to some of the clinics. We're among friends here. I'll just say it. There were clinics that were serving communities of color, but there would be white people who would come from surrounding communities or outside of Los Angeles County, fill the parking lot up. So from 4 o'clock in the morning. And so there were actually 2 lines. There were people who were actually eligible, and then people who were in the community that people went knocking on doors to try to get them to come to the clinic to get their vaccines. And then at the end of the day, this sounds like such ancient history, but it was just very recently. And so then at the end of the day, if there were vaccines available, then they would start with the people who've been lined up since 4 o'clock in the morning because they couldn't let any of the vaccines go. And everybody talked about how, there was hesitancy on the part of communities of color. And so we felt that it was education, that people needed more education. So we spent a lot of dollars for grassroots organizing to go out in the community. There was a whole initiative around churches to go out and educate people around the vaccine. I did not want to hear anything about hesitancy and how people were opposed, because of Tuskegee. There were all kinds of excuses that people were expressing on behalf of communities of color about why they did not want the vaccine. So we spent a lot of time trying to change the narrative about how communities had really been overlooked. There was a history of people, not getting health care. And then all of a sudden they're being blamed for not embracing the vaccine. So we spent a lot of time talking about narrative change. We also spent a lot of time because kids were, I'm just pivoting a little bit about what we funded during this period by invitation. A lot of kids were at home, didn't have access to computers and broadband. So we supported organizations that provided computers as well as broadband to those communities that did not have access so that those kids could learn. We didn't get to everybody, but we wanted to make sure that people had access as much as we could. Along with, other collaborative funders who joined us. We weren't the only ones. And then the other piece that I want to say that we pivoted around was food insecurity around, the pandemic and making sure that people had food, supporting all of the different food pantries and food banks. Delivery was huge here in Los Angeles. Angela, you know how spread out people are. And so we had to make sure that people who could not leave their homes, especially seniors like me, older adults, who could not leave their homes. And so we stood up, delivery services. I think there's a beautiful picture of Megan and Harry actually delivering with one of the groups that we support. So we looked at food insecurity, which is ongoing. A lot of this work is ongoing. The pandemic is not over. A lot of people are saying it's over. We're waiting for a winter surge. So we're prepared, trying to prepare people, wear your mask, get your vaccine. I think I have 5 shots, two vaccines and 3 boosters, flu shots. We're telling people there's going to be a winter surge. We're not out yet. But our grant making has certainly mirrored what is happening in the community around the pandemic. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Marsha. And I think
I'll come back to the reckoning when we talk about community capacity building and the impact that it had on our grant making.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Jennifer.
So, as a human services funder, we didn't really change direction much other than doubling down to some extent, right? Our board immediately, once we heard about the crisis and the closures, immediately set up a whole nother budget line so that we could do some really quick and responsive grant making. So we deployed the first $500,000 in 2020, by April, I want to say. it was really, both responded to, we kept it really simple. We really basically asked folks to send us an email, kind of explaining, what their most pressing needs were. And then we made approvals based upon that. More often than not, we had a lot of familiarity with these organizations. So we already had some kind of a funding relationship. And then the others, we kind of, when there was a balance left in that fund, we really just kind of directed it as general operating support to some of our core human services grantees, because we knew that, well, we didn't really know what was going to happen, but we had big questions about federal, state, and county government contracts, what was going to happen to them, whether payments were going to be processed, whether people were going to be able to retain their staff. And then so beyond the sort of the immediate grant making, we of course, continued on with our regular grant making. We tried to be very responsive in terms of reducing burdens for our grantee organizations. So in some cases where it was needed and appropriate, we took a restricted project support grant and flipped it to general operating support. In a lot of cases, we either delayed or just did not require certain reports that weren't absolutely critical to the foundation and its information that we needed to have. And then I think the bigger picture, we were, I think, less focused on, I should say this, we were much more focused on the health of the sector. So a couple of notable things that we did, we immediately engaged the Center for Effective Philanthropy to administer a survey to organizations in the region so that we could really understand without making assumptions about where the pressing needs were so that we could figure out where to best direct our energies. We did a couple of other subsequent surveys with our state association, the New York Council of Nonprofits, to drill a little bit deeper into some of those areas of pressure for organizations. And the thing I think that we're the most proud of here at the Dyson Foundation is we actually led and convened a Hudson Valley Funders Network, where we pulled in every funder that was on our radar that we were in contact with. We have been fortunate through the New York Funders Alliance that we have already had a connection to some of these grant makers, but our local community foundations, United Ways, trusts, private foundations, large and small alike. We all sort of pooled together and created a very robust, I believe it reached about $350,000 with all of the different contributions from the different funders. We created a technical assistance fund with our state association so that they could nimbly and quickly, without any barriers to accessing technical assistance, serve organizations throughout the region in whatever way that they needed to, without having to worry about proposals and grants and billing and administrative stuff. So that was actually really successful. We also convened a whole bunch of education and webinars that were, not required, but accessible to folks if it was helpful to them. And we continue to convene that group just to make sure that we can, continue to stay in touch. And then I think from a real sort of grant making perspective, two of the things that we did in the course of the pandemic was we made a concerted grant making effort around in-person learning opportunities when schools were very much shut down, if not entirely shut down. We did that in all of the communities, again, a concerted effort in the Dutchess County area, especially in high-need school districts. But we did that in all of our 6 counties. And then most recently in this past summer, the board, really encouraged us to make a big push for adding funding support to the various summer programs and camps that were happening in order to help our youth get back a little bit of normalcy, some socialization, some ties to the people who care about them in community. So we're really proud of those 2 youth-focused efforts, in addition to what we've done to hopefully, better support the sector.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I've been really struck by one of the things that I've noticed throughout philanthropy is the different coalitions of funders that are coming together to say, what do we do now? Yes, there's the sector, but also how do we best support that sector? And we'll get into that when we get to the capacity building question even more, but I'm starting to already see the thread. So I'm happy to see it happening. So Rick, let's hear from you.
Yeah, a lot of similar things, but the one thing that definitely learned the hard way is we need to have an emergency amount of funds just so you can be, very spontaneous to these needs that are emergency needs. In the middle of all this, we had, in our region, we also had 2 floods and serious rainstorm floods. And I'm sure I'm speaking to our friends in California used to these kinds of things, but just to make matters worse, right, and double down on that. With that said, I would kind of say our giving was kind of pre when the government funds started flowing, and post. Pre, we were spending a lot of time COVID testing in jails, prisons, homeless shelters, really trying to help that community and stand up that. Post, even things like diapers were not covered, and we were trying to be involved in that. But also, we spent a lot of time in other issues that are still kicking around, including for our employees, childcare being the most notable. And so even to this day, I mean, there's some challenges for that. So some grants, just even in-home childcare. I don't mean childcare centers per se, they could be that, but also just in-home helping, on that front. It was already mentioned about getting technology in houses of low and moderate income areas. There was a consortium here led by the Skillman Foundation that we participated in to really get all Detroit Public School students wired, if you will. So, participated in that. But, it's interesting. Some of the events, if you think about COVID, and then I think we're going to talk about post George Floyd in a minute as well. But then you had all these other things. I mean, we've been involved in Afghan resettlement, issues, and those are hard, especially when you look at from the legal requirements and so forth, and getting people that even speak some of these, certain dialects of certain languages. So, and then I would say we've also changed and have kind of kept at it of grants that normally, just general support. I call it SG&A support, because we found that a lot of our partners, let's face it, you weren't doing events for a long time, right? And a lot of their fundraising was just crippled. And so we were making a number of grants, just general support grants, which, is kind of like finding gold for some of these smaller groups, right? And so, and some of those changes I would also offer to you, Angela, have stayed with us. We haven't gone back to the old playbook. And I think that's true post George Floyd as well, which I know we're going to get into.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rick. There's a couple of questions coming in before we move on to some of the questions that came in beforehand. We're sort of more higher topic, but there's some very specific questions coming in. So I want to pepper those in. And there's a lot of people are writing up, they're curious about applying for money now. They're curious about their applications. They're curious about relationship building. And they're a little bit different for each one of you. So I think part of what I want to do a two-part question. And Jennifer, I'm going to start with you just to give you the heads up. So, the ball is coming to you first. And so part of what folks are interested in is, what is the best way to approach relationship building with funders from your perspective? Now, Rick, that's going to be a little bit different for you, because another part of the question is how do we get our organization's name before donors who have a donor advised fund? Is that possible? And then Marsha, that's going to be different for you, because currently the Annenberg doesn't have an open invitation for funders. So folks are interested, well, how do we what's the best strategy or approach for getting the Annenberg to see us or know us, or should we just wait? So maybe if each of you, from your own context of relationship building, and as we're in this very unknown environment that we're in, how does the group of viewers go about applying to fund foundations like yourselves? So Jennifer, let's go ahead and start with you. I hope that I tried to take 5 questions and pull it into one that each of you could answer a little bit differently. So
yeah. Well, we'll all have little different answers because we're all different animals, right?
Totally.
So relationship building, I think it's a relatively easy question for me to answer, because we are a responsive grant maker. Our doors are open. We have lots of information on our website. I think,
Jennifer, could you say what you mean by responsive grant maker?
That means that we accept unsolicited applications, or I should actually more accurately say letters of inquiry, through our online grant-making portal. That is a way for us to, I want to say to pre-screen, but that is a tool for us to make sure that organizations are not investing a ton of time and effort into a full application if it's something that we are not in a position to consider. We try to be very cognizant of that. We want folks to be spending the time and effort where they're going to bear the most fruit. And if it's not with us, then we don't want them to do that, right? So we're a responsive grant maker. We have an open application process. We certainly encourage organizations to look at our criteria and our grant making focus and see where the areas align. But I mean, we all take phone calls. We actually have our contact information up on our website. We are very accessible. We encourage organizations in the community, whether known or unknown to us, to call us. And we have conversations. I can't tell you how often I get profuse thanks and gratitude for taking the time and having a conversation and sharing information. And I think, well, that's my job, right? That's what I'm here to do. And I'm happy to do that. And certainly, even if an organization is maybe not a totally square fit, I want to have a conversation with them because there might be a piece of their programmatic work that we might be able to consider support towards, right? Even though the bigger picture may be a little off for us. So we want to be able to have those considerations. And also when the pandemic hit and things were really chaotic, we said, all right, so if there is an instance where we can't give money, how can we be responsive and supportive more broadly? And so we do actually try to brainstorm other potential funding sources if it's not the right thing for us. And in cases where it's appropriate and we actually have a connection that we feel comfortable enough reaching out to a funder, sometimes we'll do that on behalf of an organization. We try to make those connections because it's hard to make, right? Unless, you have someone on your board. You certainly, use your board for those types of connections, but we are one of the largest funders with a physical presence and mailing address here in the Hudson Valley. More often than not, the philanthropy and community outside of our community foundations, United Ways, are largely very private and not very approachable and not responsive. So it's those community connections that we try to facilitate where possible. So I guess I would just say we encourage organizations to do a little bit of the upfront legwork to see where there's some alignment, and then feel free to have a conversation with us.
Yeah, I really appreciate. I want to underscore. We oftentimes talk about that in the training where participants will say, "Can I actually reach out to them?" It's like, yes, some of them, many of them, you actually can reach out and they will have a conversation with you. So thank you for
we're human beings.
That
we like to talk to other.
Go figure. Thank you, Jennifer. Rick, how about your foundation?
Well, it's interesting. It's similar but different, I suppose, in the sense that we take applications through our portal, and sometimes people say to me, "Well, we were turned down last year. Why should we come back in?" And quite frankly, it's because we are always taking new funds in. We might have a donor with a different donor intent. But whoever asked the question about how we track on the donor advised funds must have been a planted question put there by me, because we are actually in a transformation IT project with Salesforce. And, we have to have this ability to say, "Gee, Angela, we've noticed that the last 3 years, your field of interest in your donor advised fund has been environmental matters. Do you know that we also have these other, challenges that we're dealing with? You might be interested." And with that many donor advised funds, we just have to get there where we do that kind of research for people. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I walk out my door and somebody says, "Well, gee, we weren't in so-and-so's estate plan." Mm-hmm. "When was the last time you touched them?" "Well, 10 years ago when we set up the Donors Advised Fund." Well, that's not exactly high touch, right? And so we're trying to transform to that with Salesforce. We're not there yet, but that is really where we need to go, because, we have to, at least I believe one of my biggest challenges is to be more relevant to what I call the new philanthropist. That person that's had a monetary event, maybe they were not born with a lot of money, but had a monetary event, maybe not, like Silicon Valley, but still a monetary event where now they need, and philanthropy wasn't something they did. So we're there to help teach that, to set up their mission statement and look at their field of interest and actually give them some options. But we have to we have to be more relevant to the new money, not just the old money. So that's one of my challenges. But I would say people doing their homework like I said, for the state of Michigan, unless it's opioid or social justice issues, we're kind of restricted to our 7 counties here, which is about half the population of the state, but we're more than happy, like Jennifer was alluding to kind of marry people up with donors that would have that interest or are serving a different region. And we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick.
So with a comment, so I actually cut my teeth in philanthropy at a community foundation. One of the things that we used to do was take our unfunded competitive grant programs, and then we would package them to donor advisors, which was a very successful way to approach things because it made a connection to the organizations that the donors didn't necessarily have. And it gave them an opportunity to consider grant making that, may not have otherwise been on their radar. And it doesn't create any more work for the organization.
Love that. I love that. I often tell people, one of the great ways to perhaps get in front of one of those donor advised funds is to apply to the open one. So that, because then the program officers get to know your organization, get to know what you're doing. So thank you for bringing that forward.
I would like to add on to that, Angela. I'm not a believer in asking people to do things that you don't do. So my wife and I have established, a donor advised fund at the community foundation. It's kind of like asking somebody to make a donation. They ask you how much you gave, and you said, no, 0. Well, but I think it's still not a real understood vehicle, and there have been some abuses and DAFs at the very high net worth end. And so sometimes there's that. So we do have, a consortium of us that support a lobbyist in Washington, but with that said, it's a pretty neat vehicle. We also, just FYI, take in some interesting collateral. We took in recently a vacant CVS store that had a very low basis, but we can take it in not at cost but at market. And so there's some differences that we can do that are pretty important vehicles in estate planning.
Love it. Thank you. And Marsha?
Sure. Just listening to Rick talk, it reminds me of when I was at the Marin Community Foundation for about 16 years, and we had the Buck Trust, which was the envy of every community foundation because we were just the reverse. It was, $1 million, but all discretionary. So it was fun times, I will say that, at the Community Foundation in Marin. And also, I just wanted to just say a little bit about, because, before the pandemic, we were all responsive. All the grant making was done through our portal. And I must say, me and the program officers, we miss that. We miss not being able to do site visits. Part of the job description for our program officers is the development of relationships with the community. And if you're sitting at your desk before the pandemic, then you weren't doing your job. Out there in the community, that's the piece that we are really looking forward to going back into the community, having site visits. Zoom is not the same, although we've probably burnt out several Zoom accounts because we did a lot of Zoom and we've done a lot of Zoom and we're still accessible. Jennifer, what you said really resonated about people being able to call us. And because we had that relationship with folks when we were doing online grant making. So we're chomping at the bit to get back to it. But what we did that we thought was innovative is that we have a 2-step process, very convoluted, LOI, and then a long, process for the second stage. So for all of the grant making that we're doing, we're trying to figure out how we do it going forward, is that we ask for a 1-page LOI and a budget. People have been thanking us they want all of our grant making to be like that. We love it because of course it's less work for us, but that's all we require. LOI, 1-page budget. And we're still doing that. I'm in the process of doing some year-end grant making that's like that. I don't want us to run out of time because I just want to address some capacity building, but I just want to talk about it. We could open the door about the impact that the racial reckoning had on our work. And it's so interesting. And I love this about the philanthropic community. You can get 2 funders, 3 funders, our funding and our thinking so similar. We're in different parts of the country. We all care about our communities, and it's reflected in our response during the pandemic, as you can hear from my co-panelists. But we all care about the community, and we're trying to be as responsive as we can, even with the limitations. So we'll go back to online grant making try to figure out how we can make that process one-page LOI and a budget. In terms of the impact of the racial reckoning, because it impacted all of us, I think in different ways, but in similar ways, we were all appalled. And I'm not going to even mention what's happening at the LA City Council that has us all in an uproar. You all seen it, it's now national, when the president of the United States is calling for you to resign. Hello. Anyway, but when Mr. Floyd was tragically murdered, we all pivoted. Everybody made these statements. We called it, the statement industrial complex, because everybody had a statement. But what are they doing now that really follows up with being there, fighting anti-Black racism, really working in the community around anti-Asian hate violence? What are you doing now? Have you actually funded in those areas? That really was a trigger for what happened. I can't even speak about Breonna Taylor without crying because of what happened to her and what hasn't happened for justice for her. But we do this capacity building program, which Angela, you know about, is called Alchemy. We were preparing to do an Alchemy for leaders of color. We do these cohorts. And so we were going to do one for leaders of color. I said, when Mr. Floyd was murdered, we have to do one for Black-led organizations. And so we were able to pivot. We got all, Black trainers. We set it up and we finished our cohort in March. All Black leaders who were working, and really did not have the kind of access that a lot of other organizations have had, even to our Alchemy program. And people are still talking about the fact that they have not been in rooms around capacity building with people who speak to them, who have that shared experience, and who look like them. So we're very, very happy that we were able to pivot around our Alchemy for Black-led organizations. We're getting ready to do for next year our Alchemy for Leaders of Color, which will have, I don't like to call it like one from column A, one from column B, but it will be very varied. All of the people of color, we were also able, and I'm anxious to hear what other people did in terms of grant making, but we did several dockets for Black-led organizations. We did a whole docket. I think it was 14 organizations for groups that were working on anti-Asian hate violence. We're about to do a Native American docket. So we have the flexibility to actually fund cohorts that are working on the issues. And so that's just one way that we were able to pivot around the racial reckoning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I've done Alchemy when it first came. It was amazing. It changed my organization at the time when I was working with them. So I know many people who've gone through it. It's a brilliant offering from the Annenberg Foundation that's helped so many organizations around. So we're inside of this conversation around some of the cultural shifts that have happened in the country and how it's affected grant making. And I think the second piece of that really has to do with capacity building, which I definitely want to spend the time talking about. And I know each of you has something to offer and share in that area. So Rick, I'm going to come over to you to share in either of those two categories, how it's affected your grant making, perhaps even what I know some foundations, I don't know if yours is doing this, are asking for organizations when they apply to share about some of their approaches to how they're responding. So, or any other capacity building initiatives that you all have that you'd like to share that would be helpful to our viewers.
We are asking that question, and that question is being asked of us as well. You're responding to any RFP having to do with ARPA funds or state funds in my case. With that said, though, somebody put a question in the chat, and I would agree with it, that our focus has been not on the household names, but more so on organizations that maybe most of my staff hasn't heard of, that they're more smaller organizations that don't get the fanfare, but are led by people of color. In our case, like Los Angeles, I think Los Angeles now passes our region for the most Arab Americans in the United States. Mm-hmm. We're the largest, and we have a very large Latino population as well. So we're trying to be responsive to those organizations. And another issue that we've really been focusing on is all the people that weren't eligible for PPP loans. If you look at that program at its inception, it was, and since I'm a recovering banker, I know a thing or two about it. It first started off as only to be existing customers. Of course, it changed 6 times inside of 3 months. But what it did highlight is that a lot of people in the Black and brown community needed a lot of help standing up a business plan, capacity, just, and they were not recipients of inherited equity, I'll say. Okay. So we've really been trying to be nimble about involving ourselves in what I would call, the first layer of equity, in some of these different issues. Let me give an example of something we're working on now that we haven't quite figured out. So I don't want you to say it's a done deal, but we have a very, very large population in this region of people that own, in Detroit's parlance, party stores. You would know them as, you can get bread, beer, wine, lottery tickets, these little corner stores that are many times mostly owned by the Chaldean community in this region. And so the question that we're trying to solve here is, how do we monetize that investment for that person? Their children might not be interested in working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. They may have gone to law school or have a CPA. They're not interested in watching dad and mom work. They don't want to work as hard. But how do they monetize that? And so what we're trying to do is build a consortium of what I call marriage making, to transfer the ownership of those to the African American community. But then that's not going to be good enough unless we come in with a strip of equity and line up the financing. So what we're trying to do is have that person that owns that, maybe asset rich, cash poor, monetize that investment, but then also transfer it so it's still part of the community and also lifts up a new generation of business, if you will. Maybe people might think that's easier said than done, but that might give you an idea of some of the things that we're trying to think about that may be a little bit out of the traditional, out of the box thinking. And that's what I, quite frankly, find exciting about some of our capabilities here. So I just wanted to lift that up as an example.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Jennifer, how about you all?
We've long offered mini grants, and the DEI scope of work has long been included in our sort of what we would happily consider. We certainly were more communicative and encouraging of organizations doing that work, and I think that we recognized the need to meet organizations where they were. To some extent, right? So some organizations wanted to engage their boards and their staff in, a fundamental training, right? To sort of get a common understanding, recognize, their biases and all of this kind of thing, right? Which is fine. But what we really were embracing were the organizations that dove in head first. They did the training, they did the facilitated work, they amended policies and procedures and communications and just sort of the processes through which they serve their communities. So that's something that we continue to support. Actually, part of the reason why we did a recent sort of increase to our mini grant giving was because these types of engagements are in demand and expensive and necessary. So we tried to be responsive by upping what we were able to contribute to that work. And I think on the other side, outside of sort of the broader organizationally led kind of initiatives, from the foundation's perspective, we really tried to do it through a professional development perspective, right? So, we've been, over the last couple of years, we've offered tons and tons of scholarships. Most recently, we're getting ready to announce scholarships for the Grantsmanship Center trainings. We've been offering CNAP for finance professionals. Adelphi here in the Hudson Valley, their School of Social Work has some phenomenal nonprofit programs that are very, very much equity focused, where we give priority to the communities of color. Again, because we're here trying to support the sector, and we recognize that there is little to no middle management bench, particularly for people of color, and that is where organizational strength and stability comes from, right? And we recognize that if organizations on the ground are not comprised, their board and staff are not comprised of people in community, they're going to struggle to get it right. And that representation is really important. So again, we try to really do it from a professional development perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you. Go ahead, Marsha. Yeah.
Sure. I just want to give two shout outs to tools that we use throughout all of our capacity building, and that's BoardSource. And I know all of you know about BoardSource, and we have a funder grantee relationship with them for years. And BoardSource focuses primarily on board development and training the board. They have a beautiful DEI toolkit that we're using. We use all of their introductory materials with Alchemy. So BoardSource, look them up, use them. And the second one is Catch a Fire. No, not the Bob Marley song, but Catch a Fire is an organization that we have partnered with for the last 4 years. It's an online portal for capacity building. Free of charge. We pay for it for grantees, for Alchemy participants, and for as many nonprofits as we can squeeze into what we're doing in a particular year. But Catch a Fire is amazing. Look it up, catchafire.com. They match volunteers, international volunteers, local volunteers, with organizations that post projects. If you need board development training, you need a new website, you need an annual report, whatever you need, you'll be surprised at the offerings. If you can think it, they can provide a person to provide that resource for you free of charge. So those two things, BoardSource and Catch a Fire.
Wonderful. That's great. I haven't heard of Catch a Fire.
They're amazing. So amazing.
Yeah.
And so is the Bob Marley song.
And so is so is the Bob Marley song. I agree. I can't believe we're at the top of our hour already. It is, gosh, one of every time we have one of these conversations, there's always a thread or a takeaway, and I never know where we're going to lead. But I just want to lift up how each of you, and we kind of knew this from the beginning, each of your foundations, and I would say you personally, are very committed to the sector of the nonprofit sector, and in particular, raising the capacity, the insides and infrastructure of strength, and whether it be financial, whether it be in terms of leaders of color. There's so much that in all of your shares where your foundations are deeply committed to that in general, but I think also as a response to what's been going on over the last several years. So those of you out there, that many of you are sending in questions about really specific things about the budget or about, how do we apply or what do we write? And what I want to bring it all together by saying, and we talk about this in our trainings oftentimes, that your strong applications are a reflection of a strong infrastructure. So funders like these wonderful individuals here and the foundations they represent are placing all of these funds and attention in things like Alchemy and different initiatives that you've heard in order to help strengthen the infrastructure of your organizations that then turn into strong proposals for funding. And so many of the things that you all have mentioned today is really, I think, are a testament to that. And I want to thank you on behalf of our viewers, because unrestricted money, general support, mini grants, all of that stuff really makes a difference for, streamlined applications. These are things that weren't happening as much before that really help those in the nonprofit sector. So I just want to say thank you. And I want to end by we just have a minute or so to have each of you go through and give your one final word of advice or tips or encouragement for those viewers out there that are going back into their field to help raise funds for the many different important issues that they're addressing. So let's see, Marsha, let's start. We started with Jennifer. Let's start with you, and Marsha will end with you.
We always say here, we really appreciate communicative grantees and partner organizations. And to the extent that you feel comfortable with that relationship with a particular funder, we really appreciate the honesty and the challenges that you all are experiencing, because we know that's the reality. We don't sugarcoat anything around here. And we might be able to be helpful. And at the end of the day, we all have our own challenges and struggles. And, we never want organizations to feel like their funding is at risk because they're having or confronting a particular organizational challenge. So I guess, be proactive in your communication, be forthright, and see where your funders, again, where you feel like you have that level of relationship, use that opportunity to build that relationship and see how we can partner with you to be helpful.
I would say have the courage. What I mean by that is don't be encumbered by this is how it was always done. And this is the mousetrap that you have to follow. Because I think if anything we've already expressed in the last hour is that there's new ways of doing things. There's a new way to get money out. There's new challenges and consortiums and people that are convening things that were unheard of as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. So I really think that if people have the courage to go out and ask why not, those are the people that I think are going to make it versus, well, this is the way it's always been done. So
I share everything that Jennifer and Rick, my esteemed colleagues on this panel, have suggested. And one thing that we like to encourage people is a couple of things. Do your homework. Go to our website, look at, past grantees, see where you might fit. We don't want you to waste your time. We don't want, to waste our time, although that is our job. And that's what we're here for, to be responsive and to kind of direct you. If it's not us, then it'll be, one of our sister or brother foundations. And so we have those kinds of relationships, and we really do try to send people to other places that we know might be interested. So one, do your homework. And the other thing is too, as Jennifer said, put us on your mailing list. Love getting, even though it fills up our mailboxes, but I love here, especially during the pandemic, newsletters. Send us your newsletters, send us your annual reports, even if you've never received a grant from us. You send us that newsletter and it's like, oh yeah, I just heard about them. They might be able to get a grant from so-and-so. Send us the information. Don't ever assume that it's going to go in the trash or go into spam. I'll speak for myself. I love hearing about all these organizations because we've been in our offices or we've been working remotely. We haven't been able to get out. So the more information that we can receive just over the transom from everybody, please send it. And I don't mean that lightly. Sorry, Rick. Sorry, Jennifer, you're going to be flooded. But that's a way for us to get in touch with organizations and to start the conversation and to build that relationship.
And there's learning for us.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And I'm waiting for a financial, I can't even remember how you described it, Rick, when you said that people have different instances that happen, when they come into money. I'm waiting to hit the lottery so I can go to our local community foundation so I can, yes, I'm waiting for that incident. And please say it again, Rick, because I didn't write it down the first time. What did you say?
I mean, an unplanned financial event,
That's it. That's Moderator. It. I'm waiting for a financial event.
I love that. Well, I just want to thank you all for this conversation. I definitely am going back to listen to it because so many nuggets, so many gems were shared today. So on behalf of the Grantsmanship Center, as well as our sponsors of Foundant and Grant Station, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for this sharing of your time and your expertise. And I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us again. Just a reminder that you will get this recording sometime after this, and we post all of them on our website, so you can go back and look at some of the other conversations as well. Also, save the date, January 18th, 2023. That's our next panel. So I hope you'll be able to join us for more panelists, more conversation, and good luck in your grant seeking. Take care and have a great day.